Did you know, when Louis the 14th was growing up in Palais Royal under his mother, the Queen Regent and Autriche, and Cardinal Mazarin, there were other children growing up with young King Louis? In our last video, we've seen some of the children who were Cardinal Mazarin's nieces, and were collectively called the Mazarinette. But there were other families with young children also growing up and being educated alongside them, and this family was of much nobler birth than the Mazarinette. And unlike the Mazarinette who were in the French court to seek advantageous marriages, this family was in French court because their lives literally depended on it. So today, we will find more about this family, and see how their stories unfold. But first, please like and subscribe to continue receiving more installments of the interesting but lesser-known historical stories. When Louis the 14th was growing up across the Channel, England was in turmoil. The King of England was Charles I. King Charles was embroiled in a bitter conflict with Parliament, leading to a civil war. At times, the royalist forces seemed to have the upper hand, but by early 1644, the king's military situation was deteriorating. A series of defeats in crucial battles left the royalists vulnerable, and chances of suppressing the parliamentary forces dwindled. At that time, the Queen, Henrietta Maria, was pregnant with a child. Desperate to protect his family, King Charles planned to send his wife to her native land, France. Queen Henrietta Maria was a sister of Louis XIII, and therefore a paternal aunt of the young King of France, Louis XIV. Meanwhile, parliamentarian forces were chasing her with the goal of capturing her, to use in the negotiation against King Charles. To make matters worse, Queen Henrietta Maria was nearly full term in her pregnancy. The Queen nonetheless traveled southwest as far as she could, but she had to stop at Exeter, where she delivered a baby girl. It was a difficult childbirth, and the king had to personally appeal to their physician to risk leaving London to attend to her. The Queen did not even have time to properly recover from the labor, but had to leave immediately to avoid being captured by the parliamentarian forces, eventually managing to escape to France on a Dutch ship. But she had to leave the newborn baby behind in Exeter, because the baby was born too weak, and the risks of the journey was too great. So the baby was given to the care of an English noblewoman, named Anne Villars, then known as Lady Dalkeith. And because of the baby's ill health, King Charles had her baptized in accordance with the rites of the Church of England as soon as possible. The little girl received the name Henrietta after her mother. She was then moved from Exeter to a small castle just outside of London, along with Lady Dalkeith. But after a few months, Lady Dalkeith began to fear that she would be forced to hand over the little Princess Henrietta to the parliamentary forces. So she decided to escape to France to bring the baby to her mother. It was a risky journey. She disguised herself and Henrietta as a peasant woman and her son, and escaped London. They managed to board a ship to France, where the baby was eventually reunited with her mother, Queen Henrietta Maria. The little princess was 2 at the time. The little Princess Henrietta became known at the French court as Henriette d'Angleterre, which is Henrietta of England. To appease their host and sister-in-law, Queen Henrietta Maria gave the little princess the middle name, Anne, after the French Queen Anne d'Autriche. She also pled to the French Queen for help for her husband and the royalist supporters, but Queen Anne's hands were tied too. She was dealing with her own share of problems internally in France, and could not do much to help the English royalists. At least things were not so bad at the beginning for this exiled family. After Henrietta was reunited with her mother, they were allowed to use a small chateau, and received a good amount of pension as members of the royal family. But Queen Henrietta Maria spent most of the money to help out the royalist forces in England, and to help others to escape to France away from the parliamentalist forces. King Charles I then sent Prince Charles to France to join his mother in 1646, before he himself became a captive of the parliamentalists. But the next 4 children, Mary, James, Elizabeth, and Henry, could not join them. Mary had been married off to William II of Orange at the age of 9, and was in Hague. James was with royalist forces, until he escaped to Hague to join Mary in 1648. Elizabeth and Henry were already under the control of the parliamentalists, and were placed in different places under the watchful eyes of the parliamentalists. The 16-year-old Prince Charles doted on the little sister Henrietta. He stayed in France from when she was 2 years old to when she became 4. This is probably when the kids are the cutest anyways. And this teenage prince was feeling the heavy responsibility for being the eldest son and the patriarch for the family, in place of his captured father, King Charles. But he was separated from his other younger siblings, and was feeling powerless in France. So this one and only remaining baby sister was that much more precious to the young prince. There were some troubles in the family as well. Queen Henrietta Maria wanted the children to convert to Catholic faith. She herself was Catholic, and had never converted to Church of England after she got married to Charles I. Of course, Prince Charles resisted converting to Catholic, since he had grown up in the Anglican faith, and he also knew that converting to Catholic would effectively end his chance to reclaim the throne of England. But little Henrietta didn't have much choice in the matter, and was converted to Catholic. In 1648, the 18-year-old Prince Charles left France to join his sister Mary and younger brother James in Hague. And soon, things got a lot worse for this little family than just religious disagreements. With the French court having financial problems, their pensions were being cut smaller and smaller. Queen Anne knew the family's financial situation, but she couldn't do much to help either. The French royal family itself was dealing with the Fronde Rebellion, and the French coffers were empty as well, which was the reason why the Fronde Rebellion started to begin with. King Charles couldn't send his wife and daughter any money either, because he had lost his second civil war, and was being held prisoner by members of the parliament. So this exiled family's income was completely wiped at that point. Queen Henrietta had to sell her jewels and silvers she brought from England, but she was running out of those as well. Things got so bad, such that they could not afford enough firewood for winter. So they had to huddle together, wearing coats and gloves indoors, to keep themselves warm. They hardly went out, because they did not have money to buy proper clothing that would fit their ranks. They also lost the use of the chateau, and had to move into a small room in the Rouve Palace. Then, in 1649, things really hit rock bottom for this mother and daughter. They heard the news that the father, King Charles I, was executed by Oliver Cromwell's forces. Now there was no hope that the King Charles will somehow miraculously escape and turn the tide of the Civil War. Queen Henrietta Maria and Princess Henrietta were simply exiled former queen and princess, with no prospects or hope. There was the elder son and heir, Charles, but he was also in exile in Netherlands. Nobody really thought the Stuarts would ever sit in the English throne again. In French court, they were poor nobodies. Their high birth meant nothing, because people thought there was nothing to be gained from it. To make matters worse, France's own civil war, the Fronde Rebellion, was going badly for the French royalist factions supporting Queen Anne and Cardinal Mazarin. The French royal family decided to flee Paris. Henrietta and her mother stayed behind in Louvre, as the French royals were in such a hurry to escape themselves, and did not have time or resources to make arrangements to help the foreign relatives to escape. Or, they simply didn't care. After a few years like this, the Fronde was over, and the French royals returned to Paris. Things got a tiny bit better for this mother and daughter too. Queen Anne invited them to come to live in the Palais Royal, where Queen Anne and her 2 sons also stayed. By this time, Henrietta was 9 years old, and she got to spend some time with her cousins, 15-year-old King Louie the 14th, and his younger brother, 13-year-old Philippe. The brothers did not pay much attention to this skinny and sickly cousin. There were other girls, such as Cardinal Mazarin's nieces, known as the Mazarinettes, that captured the eyes of the young king after all. Henrietta and her mother were still not of much importance to anyone, but at least their living conditions became a bit better, and with that, Henrietta Maria turned her attention to getting Henrietta the best education as she could arrange, and to find the best match for the princess as she possibly can. The education part was no problem. Henrietta was a bright young girl, who quickly learned all of the things Queen Henrietta Maria and the teachers had to teach. But with their exiled status, and with no means to provide any dowry for Henrietta, finding a good match was next to impossible. Henrietta Maria wanted to get King Louie interested in Henrietta, but this was not working. King Louie himself was infatuated with Cardinal Mazarin's niece, Marie Mancini, and was not paying any attention to Henrietta. King Louis's mother, Queen Anne, was not interested either. She was trying to get her own niece, Princess Maria Theresa of Spain, as the new French queen. And even if the Spanish connection did not work out, the exiled English princess was the last one Queen Anne wanted Louis to marry. After all, the Stuarts were simply the poor cousins living on the charity of the French royals. The marriage with Stuarts was simply undesirable, so much so that when the elder brother, Charles II, proposed to one of the Mazarinette, Hortense Mancini, Cardinal Mazarin refused the match. All of this suddenly changed when, in 1660, the monarchy was restored in England. Now 30 years old, Charles II triumphantly returned to Britain to claim the English throne. With Charles's return to the throne, the fortunes of the mother and daughter in France had changed overnight as well. Henrietta Maria was now Dowager Queen of England, and Henrietta was the sister of the new King of England. And Charles himself did not forget about his mother and little sister. Once restored to the throne, Charles immediately brought them back from France. He had last seen Henrietta when she was only about 4 years old, and now she came back as a girl of 16. King Charles must have felt a new sense of determination to take care of this young sister, who endured so much during the exile. To make up for all the hardship she had to endure in foreign land, Charles wanted to arrange the best marriage for his little sister. Of course, now the sister's station has changed dramatically. Before, she was an exiled daughter of an executed King Charles I, a poor princess without a country, who had to rely on the kindness of her relatives. Nobody thought the Stuart dynasty will be back on the throne of England. But now, she is the sister of the new King of England. And with the elder sister Mary already married, and the second sister Elizabeth having died during the Civil War years, she is now the only English princess remaining to be married. While none of the powerful noble families was seriously interested in marrying Henriette before, now everyone wants to make an alliance with the new king through this suddenly eligible 16-year-old princess. Queen Henrietta Maria's first preference was always her own nephew, King Louie the Fourteenth of France. Louis's mother, Queen Anne, wasn't interested during their exile years, but now, with the Stuarts' fortune dramatically changed, Queen Anne started to look at Henrietta with renewed interest. The marriage with Louis was still out of question, because by now he was engaged to Princess Maria Theresa of Spain, like Anne always wanted to. But Louis was not the only candidate, since, after all, Queen Anne had another son, Philippe. So after some negotiation between England and France, the marriage between Henrietta and Philippe took place in 1661. It was a triumphant return for Henrietta, who spent her formative years in France as a poor relative of the royal family, who received less attention than even the lower-born nieces of Cardinal Mazarin. But now she is returning as the real Princess of England, to marry King's own brother. They were a well-matched couple by all outward accounts. The bride was a beautiful princess of high birth. She immediately captivated the French court as soon as she came back to France for her marriage. She was fluent in French, well-educated, witty, and talented. The groom was also a beautiful young man, and the highest-ranking men in the court after King Louis. King Louis himself had just gotten married, and had no heir yet, so Philippe was first in the line of succession to the French throne. So, to all who observed, it was a marriage between an ideal couple. But soon after the marriage, Henrietta realized that there were dark clouds hovering over this marriage. So what were the problems? We will discuss more about Henrietta and Philippe's marriage in our next video. So please like and subscribe to continue receiving more stories from history. It really helps a small channel like us.